Ritual shadows. The icy wind whispered through the cobblestone streets of Boston as Detective Nancy Harper adjusted her scarf. The call had come through just before dawn, yanking her out of a restless sleep. A murder, unusual in its brutality, had been discovered in an abandoned church on the city's outskirts. The victim's identity was still unknown, but the scene was already drawing whispers of something beyond the ordinary. Her partner, Detective Oscar Hayes, leaned against their car, his tall frame silhouetted by the rising sun. His expression was grim as he held out a steaming cup of coffee. "Morning," he said, though there was nothing good about it. "Morning," Nancy replied, taking the cup gratefully. "What do we know?" "Not much yet," Oscar said. "But word is, it's something we haven't seen before." They made their way to the church, a decaying structure with stained glass windows fractured like spiderwebs. The air inside was heavy with the metallic tang of blood. Crime scene tape sectioned off the altar, where the victim lay sprawled in a grotesque tableau. Candles surrounded the body, their wax pooled and hardened like tears on the floor. Nancy's stomach churned. The victim, a man in his 30s, was positioned with his arms outstretched, his wrists bound with crimson ropes. Symbols were carved into his chest, their jagged lines intersecting in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. "Ritualistic. What the hell is this?" Nancy murmured. Oscar knelt by the body, careful not to disturb the scene. "It looks like some kind of ritual," he said. "But what kind? I have no idea." The medical examiner, Dr. Eleanor Vance, stepped forward, her gloved hands meticulous as she pointed to the carvings. "These symbols, they're not random," she said. "They're precise. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." Nancy's gaze drifted to the symbols, her mind racing. She'd seen something like this before, in an old case file from a decade ago. But that killer had been caught. Hadn't he? The investigation moved quickly, but answers were scarce. The victim's fingerprints yielded no matches in the system. The symbols remained a mystery, even after consultation with experts in ancient languages and occult practices. Nancy and Oscar combed through every lead, every fragment of evidence, but the pieces refused to fit. Then came the second murder. This time, the body was found in a dilapidated warehouse near the harbor. The scene was eerily similar, symbols carved into flesh, candles arranged with ritualistic precision. But there was one chilling difference. A message scrawled in blood on the wall read, "The shadows will rise." "What does that mean?" Oscar asked, his voice edged with frustration. Nancy's eyes narrowed. "It means we're dealing with something bigger than we thought." Days turned into weeks, and the murders continued. Each victim was left in a public space, their bodies displayed like macabre art installations. The city was gripped with fear, the press dubbing the killer the ritualist. But for Nancy and Oscar, the case became something personal. It wasn't just about catching a killer, it was about unraveling a conspiracy that seemed to stretch beyond the bounds of logic. Their breakthrough came unexpectedly. A name surfaced during their research: the Order of Tenebris, an ancient sect rumored to have dabbled in dark rituals. Most historians dismissed it as myth, but Nancy's gut told her otherwise. "If this order is real," Nancy said, pacing in their cramped office, "then they might be the key to all of this." Oscar frowned. "You really think a centuries-old cult is behind these murders?" "I don't know," Nancy admitted. "But it's the only lead we have." The investigation took them deep into Boston's underbelly, to places most people avoided. They questioned informants, followed paper trails, and pieced together a history that was as disturbing as it was elusive. The Order of Tenebris, they learned, had been linked to similar murders in the past, each series of killings ending abruptly without resolution. "It's like they vanish," Nancy said, poring over old police reports. "Every time the heat gets too intense, they disappear." "Or they're silenced," Oscar said darkly. Their persistence paid off when they uncovered a hidden meeting place, an abandoned library on the edge of the city. The building was a relic of another era, its walls lined with dusty tomes and its air thick with mildew. Nancy's heart pounded as they descended into the basement, flashlights cutting through the darkness. What they found there was beyond anything they'd imagined. The room was a shrine to something ancient and sinister. Symbols identical to those carved into the victims adorned the walls, and an altar stood at the center, its surface stained with blood. "This is it," Nancy whispered. "This is where it all happens." But before they could investigate further, a sound froze them in their tracks, footsteps echoing in the darkness. Nancy and Oscar drew their weapons, their eyes scanning the shadows. A figure emerged, cloaked and masked, holding a dagger that gleamed ominously in the flashlight beam. "You don't belong here," the figure said, their voice distorted. "Drop the weapon," Oscar commanded. The figure laughed, a chilling sound that reverberated through the room. "You've seen too much. The shadows demand your silence." Before they could react, more figures appeared, their movements swift and coordinated. Nancy and Oscar fought back, their training kicking in, but they were outnumbered. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, a shot rang out, scattering the cultists. Backup had arrived, called in by Oscar's emergency signal. The room erupted into chaos as officers stormed the basement, subduing the cultists and securing the scene. Nancy and Oscar, battered but alive, watched as the ritualistic nightmare was dismantled piece by piece. In the days that followed, the investigation revealed the full extent of the Order's operations. Dozens of members were arrested, and evidence linked the group to murders spanning decades. But the mastermind behind the killings remained elusive, their identity a haunting mystery. As Nancy and Oscar stood on the steps of the courthouse, watching the media frenzy below, Nancy couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. "We stopped them this time," Oscar said. "That's what matters." Nancy nodded, but her mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Because somewhere in the shadows, she knew, the true threat was still waiting.
Shadows of Tokyo, the vanished masterpiece. Nancy Carter, a private detective known for her sharp mind and unyielding tenacity, sat in her dimly lit office in downtown Tokyo. Rain drummed against the window, casting ripples of light across her cluttered desk. The room smelled of stale coffee and faint cigarette smoke, remnants of her long nights chasing leads in a city that never seemed to sleep. She was about to call it a night when the phone rang, a piercing sound that cut through the monotony of the rain. Nancy picked up, her voice steady, but tinged with curiosity. "Nancy Carter," she said. "Miss Carter," came a low, trembling voice. "My name is Hiroshi Tanaka. I need your help. My brother, Kenji, a renowned painter, has disappeared without a trace." Nancy leaned back in her chair, her interest piqued. She had heard of Kenji Tanaka, a prodigy whose art captured the essence of Tokyo's vibrant yet shadowy soul. His works had sold for millions, and his mysterious persona only added to his allure. "When did he disappear?" she asked. 3 days ago, Hiroshi replied. "But it's not just him. His latest series, a collection of 6 paintings called The Soul of Shadows, is also missing. Those paintings, they were his magnum opus." "Do you suspect foul play?" Nancy pressed. There was a pause. "Yes. Kenji had enemies, people who envied his talent and resented his success. I'll pay you handsomely if you can find him and recover the paintings." Nancy agreed, her mind already racing with possibilities. Little did she know, this case would lead her deep into Tokyo's labyrinthine underbelly, where art, crime, and betrayal intertwined. The investigation began at Kenji's studio, a sprawling space tucked away in the Shinjuku district. The studio was eerily quiet, the scent of turpentine lingering in the air. Canvases lined the walls, each one a masterpiece in its own right, but the easel at the center was conspicuously empty. Nancy's trained eyes scanned the room. She noticed a smudge of red paint on the floor near the easel, leading to the back door. Following the trail, she found a torn piece of fabric, a deep indigo hue, clinging to a nail. Pocketing the fabric, she made a mental note to analyze it later. Her next stop was the gallery where Kenji's works were often displayed. The curator, a nervous man named Yuki Mori, seemed reluctant to speak. Kenji was under a lot of pressure, Yuki admitted. There were rumors he was involved with dangerous people. They say he owed money to the yakuza. Nancy's eyes narrowed. The yakuza, Tokyo's infamous crime syndicate, was a lead she couldn't ignore. She thanked Yuki and headed to her next destination, a bar in Kabukicho, rumored to be a yakuza hangout. The bar was a smoky, dimly lit establishment, filled with shadowy figures and the hum of low conversation. Nancy walked in, her presence drawing curious glances. She approached the bartender, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek. "I'm looking for information about Kenji Tanaka," she said, sliding a hefty tip across the counter. The bartender hesitated, then leaned in. "Word is, Kenji got tangled up with a man named Ryuji Sato. He's a big shot in the yakuza. If anyone knows what happened to your painter, it's him." Getting to Ryuji wasn't easy. Nancy spent the next 2 days tracking his movements, eventually finding him at an exclusive club in Ginza. She managed to secure a meeting by posing as an art dealer interested in buying the soul of shadows. Ryuji Sato was as intimidating as she'd imagined. His piercing gaze seemed to see right through her. He sipped his whiskey and smirked. "You're not an art dealer," he said. Nancy didn't flinch. "And you're not just a patron of the arts. Where is Kenji Tanaka?" Ryuji laughed. "You're bold. I like that. But you're asking the wrong questions. Kenji's paintings are worth more than his life. Do you know what people would pay to own a piece of his soul?" Nancy's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "Kenji's paintings aren't just art," Ryuji explained. "They're a window into something darker. Whoever possesses them holds a piece of Tokyo's shadow." Before Nancy could press further, the meeting was abruptly cut short. She left the club with more questions than answers, but a renewed determination to uncover the truth. Her investigation took her to the outskirts of Tokyo, to an abandoned warehouse where she believed Kenji was being held. The air was thick with tension as she crept through the shadows, her footsteps silent. She found Kenji tied to a chair, his face pale but resolute. "Nancy Carter," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're late. Let's get you out of here," she replied, cutting his bonds. But before they could escape, they were confronted by Ryuji and his men. "You should have stayed out of this," Ryuji growled, drawing a knife. What followed was a chaotic struggle, a clash of wills and survival. Nancy fought with every ounce of her strength, her resolve unshaken. In the end, she and Kenji emerged victorious, but not without scars, physical and emotional. Back in her office, Nancy examined the soul of shadows, now safely recovered. The paintings were hauntingly beautiful, each one a reflection of Tokyo's hidden depths. She couldn't help but wonder if Ryuji had been right about their power. Kenji, now a free man, vowed to use his art to shed light on the darkness, rather than succumb to it. As for Nancy, she knew this case would stay with her forever, a reminder of the fine line between light and shadow in the heart of Tokyo. The rain continued to fall as Nancy poured herself a drink, her thoughts lingering on the mysteries yet to be uncovered. In a city like Tokyo, the shadows were never far behind.